Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with America's leading reading ambassador, a speaker, trainer, and coach, Danny Brassell. Dr. Danny is a highly sought-after speaker, trainer, and coach known as Jim Carrey with a PhD. He has also spoken to over 3,000 audiences worldwide, authored 16 books, including his latest, Leadership Begins with Motivation. He is the co-founder of www.thereadinghabit.com, the world's top reading engagement program. As a former inner-city teacher, he is on a mission to bring joy back into education and the workplace by transforming struggling and reluctant readers into more passionate and proficient readers. Ultimately, he trains leaders how to communicate their messages through effective and inspirational storytelling. Enjoy this interview.
So, Danny, thank you for taking a minute out today. And what I want to do before we get into everything here is, as America's leading reading ambassador, I want to know, how did you do with COVID? The last 2+ years was rather tumultuous. How did you get through that time period? And how does it change the way that you approach not only your life, but business?
Well, a lot of people look at the negatives to everything. I like to look at the positives to everything. And I always tell people I think the pandemic was a huge blessing to my business. It made me think on my feet because one of my largest revenue streams is from public speaking. And people would ask me, well, how did the pandemic affect your public speaking? I said, well, it was great, with all these huge audiences available. I'm like, my gosh, overnight I lost all of my gigs within 48 hours of COVID. And so I had to pivot. And there was two great things that happened. First of all, people have always asked me to coach them in their speaking, and I've always resisted it. But when it became a necessity, I started doing it. And so now I've built a large business where I'm helping entrepreneurs, executives, anybody really who wants to get their audience to take the next step. I now coach those people in 2-day seminars to show them how to create a stellar talk that'll increase their income, freedom, and impact. So that was one benefit. And then secondly, as you know, because of technology, now we can communicate with the world. And so one of the things that I did was I made friends with a gentleman, Dermot Hudner, out of Limerick, Ireland, who has this wonderful company called Cyber Smarties, which is basically a social media platform for kids like Facebook. And the way it works is, let's say I type a message to you, Joe. I say, I think you're ugly. Well, it won't let me send the message. Instead, it has a pop-up video of me saying, hey, there's better ways to talk to people than that. Here's some options. And basically, they find within 2 weeks, kids stop sending negative messages to one another. And it's eliminated cyberbullying in Ireland. And now the program, we have it in India, New Zealand, Ghana. We just opened in Turkey. And it's just a wonderful program. The reason I'm on board is both Dearman and I share a passion for creating positive habits in people. And one of the most positive habits I try to train people is how to make reading a part of their daily routine. So I actually consider the pandemic to be a huge blessing to my business.
So let's get to the brass tacks of what you do. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of kids at a career day, let's say second or third graders. One of them looks up at you and says, what do you do for a living? How do you answer that child?
Well, I do lots of different things for a living. I'm a speaker. I'm still a professor. I'm an entrepreneur. And I'm a dad. So I'm qualified in lots of different areas. And that's one of the things I like to tell kids is you never know where your life is going to take you. I was actually just making this point. My son is now a junior in high school, and he's been feeling a little bit down lately because he doesn't know what he wants to do in life. And I said, well, when I was your age, all I wanted to do was to go to Yale and play football for Yale. And I remember getting the rejection letter on a Tuesday afternoon, and I was a 17-year-old kid in a fit of rage. I went alphabetically down the list and looked for the very first university without a football team, and that's how I chose American University, which turned out to be one of the greatest decisions in my life because it exposed me. At one point, I worked on Capitol Hill for a U.S. congressman. I worked at the Community for Creative Nonviolence, which is the country's largest homeless shelter. And then my dream job, I got to work for the American Society of Newspaper Editors, which got me in contact with every major newspaper editor in the country. I actually got to cover President Bush Sr. in the 92 campaign. And, from there, I got to talk to all these different newspaper editors, had all these great job offers, and a major newspaper offered me $16,500 a year to do the city beat for their newspaper. Meanwhile, a friend told me they were hiring teachers in South Central Los Angeles for $25,000 a year. So, Joe, I like to always tell people I became a teacher for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay. And then from teaching, I became an administrator, a professor, a researcher, an international speaker, and now an entrepreneur. So that's a very long answer for that third grader, but I'd say you're constantly evolving.
So when you were in that second, third grade realm, what was your dream to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be president of the United States, Joe.
Cool. Are you happy with how everything turned out?
Yeah, it's a fun journey, and maybe I will become president of the United States one day. One of the reasons my wife loves me is early on in our relationship, I told her, I've decided I don't think I want to run for president of the United States. And she said, what I love about you, Danny, is that you thought you could. And that's one of the things I always like to point out to kids is don't let anybody tell you what you can't do in life. Anything is possible, especially in the United States of America.
Absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about how these seeds of motivation got into you as a child. What were some seminal things? Where'd you grow up, and kind of how did those seeds begin for you to become who you are today?
Well, it's kind of ironic, Joe, that people consider me America's leading reading ambassador because I grew up hating reading. My father was a public librarian. I always hated the public library growing up. The furniture was always uncomfortable. It always smelled funny to me in the library. There was always an elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There was always some freaky homeless guy hanging out by the bookshelves who thought he was a vampire. And it wasn't until I started teaching in the inner city where I saw a lot of my students didn't have the advantages I had growing up. And I said to myself, Joe, man, shame on me. I mean, I was very blessed. We were lower middle class, but we always had food on the table. Both of my parents were present in the home, and they always read in front of us kids, to us kids, and we had plenty of access to reading materials. And so probably the shortest answer I can give is my parents were the greatest influence on my life. I was very blessed. Warren Buffett always says, he won the DNA lottery. He grew up with amazing parents in a great environment and the best country on the planet.
So every day we wake up, we have these motivating forces that not only get us out of bed, but to lead us through the day. What is it for you? What drives you every day to be who you are, to do what you do?
I love creating, Joe, and that's why I started writing. Actually, the book I'm writing right now is the result of the last book I wrote, which was a book when I was a middle school teacher. I was the only teacher in the history of my school to have no students tardy for class, and the reason was because I always started class by reading aloud a Paul Harvey story. I'm pretty old. I don't know if you remember, Joe. There was a guy named Paul Harvey. He used to be on the radio, and he'd come on every day at 12:15. He'd say, "I'm Paul Harvey," with the rest of the story. And he would tell you this 5-minute read aloud, and you were trying to figure out who he was describing or what the company was he was talking about. And my kids love those, but a lot of those old Paul Harvey stories are a little bit outdated because they talk about successful people like Sears and Roebuck. Well, today's kids don't know who Sears and Roebuck are or let alone what they invented. And so I had to update the book. And so my last book was called Leadership Begins with Motivation, and that describes more contemporary role models for kids, people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Michael Jordan. But it was interesting, after I read the book, after I wrote it, Joe, I realized completely unintentionally most of my examples were of white male Americans. And so the book I'm writing right now, most of the examples are of female, minorities, and international success stories, because I think kids from everywhere have to look up at different role models from different places.
Got a great Paul Harvey story for you. Back in '93, I got my first internship at a radio station. It was called Signal Hill in Kansas City. And it was, the station was 61 Country, and I would take phone calls, and they would call in to former Royals players and answer questions. And I never knew Paul Harvey was, but that segment would always come on before the Royals broadcast. And I would always stop and listen to it. And I just got to the point where I loved it. I look forward to it. And I think Kansas City time, it was at like 5 or so. Anyway, so yeah, I'm of the ilk. I understand. He had a wonderful way about him. So yeah, Paul was, he was a gem for sure.
You know, he passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 325 years old. But I always tell people his books are all out of print, but they're still available on Amazon if you go to Amazon. And each of those books, there's about 4 of them, I think. Each of them has about 101 5-minute rest of the story stories, which, I mean, even for parents listening, they're a great way to tuck your kids into bed.
So, as a lover of reading, what was the first book for you in your life growing up that really parted the curtains, either made you love reading or you wanted to write because you read it?
Yeah, so there's a couple of books that I'll mention, Joe. When I was a kid, I hated reading. I was only interested in picture books. And so really the first book that got me excited about reading was Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are. I could really relate to the mischievous boy, Max. I love the pictures. And, one of the benefits of my father being a librarian, which I didn't appreciate at the time, was he used to bring authors home to dinner. And one night he brought Maurice Sendak home to dinner, and I knew who Maurice Sendak was. And he told me when he was a little boy, his aunts and uncles used to come to his house every single weekend, and they would drink lots of beer and make lots of noise and totally trash his house. And so when he was drawing the pictures of the monsters in Where the Wild Things Are, those are his aunts and uncles. And so what that provided me, Joe, was insight into where are authors getting all of their ideas. I remember in high school being assigned all kinds of books that I hated. And then one teacher generously took me aside and he recommended The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. And Joe, that was the first book that I had to stop reading because I was laughing so hard. I just thought it was so wonderfully written. And now, once I started teaching the kids and trying to find anecdotes to get them inspired, I'll just read any kind of book. I love books like the John Maxwell leadership books because John Maxwell does such a good job of talking about real people, and you're trying to figure out, just like Paul Harvey did, trying to figure out, who's this person that had this huge impact on society. I live for those stories of obscure people, or you're trying to figure out, what is it that they're talking about? So I've had lots of wonderful influences in my reading life.
So at the end of the proverbial day, when you sit back and look at what you did in a day, how do you quantify a good day? How do you think, wow, that worked, that was a good day?
That's a great question, Joe. So there's a book I read called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. Nobody has to read it because I already read it. I can already tell you what it's about. It's about minimizing things in your life. And that book changed my life with one sentence. He said, in Greek, the word priority can only be used in the singular. And that changed my life, Joe. And the reason is every day I give myself one priority that I have to get done. I can get more done, but I have to get the one priority done every single day. I have found I'm so much more productive by having the one priority because I'm a guy that loves lists, Joe, and I'll have like a list of 20 things to do. And if I only accomplish 19 of them, at the end of the day, I consider the day a failure. Or 20 on the list was the one I really should have prioritized. And so I'm so much happier now. I have one priority every single day, and in the masterminds that I lead, I always tell the group that I'm a former teacher, so I have to have aids to help me remember things. And so I think in order to have balance in your life, you have to have focus on what I call the 6 F's, and those are I have fitness goals, financial goals, family goals, faith goals, fun goals, and fulfillment goals. And so basically 6 out of the 7 days of the week, I give myself one priority that matches at least one of those goals. So for example, maybe Monday, my fitness goal is I will have a 60-minute cardio workout on the exercise bike. So that's my priority for the day. Tuesday, Maybe my priority is that I have to reach out to at least 20 former customers via telephone. Wednesday, my priorities may be a family priority, like I have to read aloud with each of my 3 children. Thursday, maybe my faith goal is to attend my men's Bible study. Friday, a fun goal is I'm going to go out on a date with my wife or go to dinner with a friend. And then Saturday, my fulfillment goal would be something like I'm going to volunteer for a couple of hours planting trees at the local park. And then even the Lord had to rest on Sunday, so I have no priorities on Sunday except giving honor to God. So that's how I evaluate my days. Long answer to your short question, Joe.
Yeah, no, that's good. That kind of hits a lot of different points. So in your life, who would you consider a hero?
Well, my parents definitely are my heroes. If I could meet somebody like, I feel like every century there's this extraordinary person that thinks in a different way, Joe. So like in the 19th century, I don't know where Abraham Lincoln came from, but my goodness, this guy had a huge impact on the world. And he still has one of my favorite quotes, which I wish more politicians today would heed. He said, "I know the best way to defeat my enemies. I shall make them my friends." I'm like, wow, that's an interesting way of looking at the world. In the 20th century, we had so many people I would have loved to have met. I would have loved to have met, Gandhi or Nelson Mandela. I mean, Nelson Mandela, he was in prison for 27 years for something that is a fundamental right in the United States. He had criticized his government, and when he became I don't remember if South Africa as a president or a prime minister, but when he took over the leadership of South Africa, the white minority was freaking out. They're like, uh-oh, here comes the Vengeance Day. And he did exactly the opposite. He created the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And so basically any white who had murdered a black during apartheid, they had to stand before a committee that included the family of the person that they had killed. They had to confess to killing that person, and as long as they confessed, they were forgiven. This was government policy. I'm like, wow, where does this person come from? And what happened was he really healed South Africa very quickly within one generation. It's amazing. A person like Albert Einstein, I'm like, where do these people come from? I'm just fascinated by these people. So, I might not be able to meet these people personally, Joe, but I guess my heroes, I can always read about them in great books. And I think you and I probably share a real passion for biographies. I mean, one of the books I'm reading right now is about the great composers throughout history, from Mozart to the Beatles. And there's so many of these musicians I would love to ask them. I was reading about John Williams and Steven Spielberg had attended a function for John Williams' 90th birthday the other day, a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about how John Williams comes up with his compositions. And I just love listening to people who are the top of their field talking about what it is that inspires them, what it is that what are the habits that they develop that make them so successful. So again, a very long answer to a short question, but lots of people inspire me, but my absolute top heroes are my mother and my father.
So if you can meet one person alive on the planet right now, who would it be? Who would you love to meet and talk to?
If I can meet one person who's alive today, well, that's a fantastic question. Who's fascinating to me? This is crazy. Well, maybe it's just top of mind. I guess I would love to meet Steven Spielberg. I mean, I grew up loving movies, and for a time there, I wanted to be a movie director. And Steven Spielberg's just created. I think people neglect to give him his due for how special he is. He's created so many. I was shocked when he was going to redo West Side Story. I thought, well, why would they remake a perfect movie? And he remade it, and I thought, wow, he made it better. He's amazing. So maybe Steven Spielberg. That's kind of a lame answer probably, but I would love to meet Steven Spielberg.
No, I think that's a great answer. I think he would be a great person to meet. Everyone out there has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your clients, readers, but ultimately you live your life. You have a perception of you. Who do you think you are?
Well, hopefully I'm a kind person who's making a positive difference in the world, and people consider me someone who is helpful, who serves first.
I like that answer a lot. Danny, if anybody out there wants to learn more about you, anything related to your world, where's the best place for them to go?
Well, as a thank you, Joe, to you and your audience for enduring my long answers to your short questions, I want to give everybody a couple of freebies. So if you go to freegiftfromdanny.com, again, freegiftfromdanny.com, I'm going to give everybody a couple of free things. First of all, I'm going to give everybody a complimentary e-copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. This is a book I wrote for a elementary school principal who was trying to keep his faculty and staff positively engaged. And so I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So every week I give you a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation, demonstrates the same concept. You can read that in 5 minutes. I'm also going to give everybody access to last summer. I did a 5-day reading challenge online where every day for an hour for a week, I met with 700 parents and gave them all kinds of ideas on how to get their kids excited about reading. I mean, Joe, I think schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read. But the question I always ask people is, what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I teach kids why to read because I've never had to tell a kid, go watch TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read. I want them to choose to do it on their own because they love it. And so those are my gifts to your audience at freegiftfromdanny.com. And I just really wanted to thank you, Joe, for having me on because I really appreciate the joy and positivity you're spreading with the world. We need a lot more of you.
Oh, thank you, Danny. Yeah, I can just hear the positivity coming out of you. There's so much good in this very short time that we've spent together. So thank you for what you're doing for the world. I think there's a lot of things that hopefully we've understood and boiled down to the essentials of living through this pandemic, that it's really about community and simple things like just finding inspiration from people like you, reading a good book, things like that. So it's been wonderful to talk with you and expose those very elemental yet powerful ideas for everybody. So thank you for taking time out. Have a great new year and good luck with everything. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. God bless.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.